Have you ever noticed this? When someone says they've joined a cult, our minds instantly jump to alarm bells, brainwashing, danger, isolation. But when that same person says they belong to a religion, we nod politely, maybe even admire their devotion. Strange, right? Two words that sound worlds apart, yet when you peel back the layers, they're often describing the same thing. Here's the hook. What if I told you the line between a cult and a religion isn't really a line at all, but a timeline? Stick with me because the next few minutes might challenge how you see belief itself. The truth is, the gap between cult and religion isn't as wide as we like to believe. In fact, one of the biggest differences comes down to something surprisingly simple: age. Time works like a filter. Beliefs don't necessarily need to change, soften, or even make sense. They just need to last long enough. With each passing generation, they gain legitimacy until the questions fade and the rituals become normal. Think about it, most religions that dominate the world today started out small, strange, even suspicious. In their earliest days, they looked exactly like the groups we'd call cults now. They had a charismatic leader claiming special access to hidden truth. They gathered devoted followers, rejected local traditions, and created rituals that outsiders thought were bizarre or dangerous. The only real difference: they survived. They grew, they outlasted their critics, and over time they became mainstream. That's the irony. What we call faith today was once treated as dangerous extremism. The early Christians, for example, were secretive, ritualistic, and accused of spreading subversive ideas. To the Roman Empire, they were nothing more than a cult. But centuries later, with political allies, cathedrals, and a growing flock, the label changed. Faith replaced suspicion, tradition replaced fear, and suddenly what once looked absurd became sacred. So here's the question: if we're so quick to see manipulation in a backyard cult, why do we look away when the same mechanics are wrapped in stained glass and incense? Maybe the difference isn't truth at all, just public relations branding and time. Let's take a closer look at what actually happens inside these groups, because the overlap between cults and religions is bigger than most people want to admit. The techniques are practically identical. Cults isolate their members, cutting them off from outside influence, making sure the group becomes their whole world. Religions do the same, just in more polished ways, teaching that the world outside is dangerous, sinful, or corrupted. Cults discourage doubt, framing questions as weakness. Religions, they've mastered that game for centuries, labeling doubt as sin, heresy, or even rebellion against God. And here's another pattern: both promise identity and meaning in exchange for loyalty. They hand you a ready-made worldview where insiders are chosen and outsiders are damned. That sense of belonging feels powerful, but it also becomes a trap. You're loved, but only if you obey. You're accepted, but only if you stay. Even the language is almost copy-paste. Phrases like the truth, the path, the light, or God's will work like shields. They shut down conversations, they silence logic, and they mark critics as enemies. Over time, these words stop being about meaning and start becoming weapons of control. Think about the way obedience is framed. In cults, following the leader is the highest virtue. In religions, obedience is treated as holiness. Either way, loyalty trumps truth. It's not about asking questions, it's about not asking them. And when obedience is dressed up as morality, people stop noticing the chains because the chains are called sacred. This is why time plays such a huge role. Cults look extreme because they haven't had centuries to polish their image. They're raw, unfiltered, easy to spot. But give them a few generations, some scriptures, a couple of holidays, and suddenly what once looked terrifying now feels traditional. That's the magic trick: not changing the formula, just letting it age. So when we point at a group today and laugh, saying, "How could anyone believe that?" we should remember that's exactly what people said about early Christians, early Muslims, early Buddhists, even early Mormons. They were mocked, persecuted, even killed for their strange, dangerous beliefs. And yet many of them grew into institutions with global influence, not because they were more true, but because they were more organized, more adaptive, and more resilient. At the end of the day, the pattern repeats itself. Some groups fade away, others scale up. And the difference between being labeled a cult or a religion often has nothing to do with truth, but everything to do with numbers and time. Let's push this further, because if we look past the labels, the psychology is almost identical. Cults and religions both thrive on emotional levers: fear, guilt, hope, belonging. They don't need to be violent to be controlling. They just need to convince you that salvation is conditional and that questioning is dangerous. And once those ideas take root, loyalty feels like love and obedience feels like morality. Think about fear. Cults use it to keep members in line, fear of leaving, fear of punishment, fear of losing their community. Religions tap into the same emotion, fear of hell, fear of eternal punishment, fear of disappointing God. These aren't side effects. They're core features. Fear is simply easier to control than reason. Hope plays the same role. Cults promise a better world and escape, a reward waiting just around the corner. Religions do too, paradise, heaven, enlightenment. And when that hope is tied to obedience, follow these rules, submit to this authority, and you'll be rewarded. It's not really hope anymore. It's a leash. People don't stay because they're free. They stay because they're afraid to lose meaning. And then there's love, maybe the most powerful tool of all. Both cults and religions use it as a kind of glue. Love for the leader, love for the group, love for the faith. It feels like a gift, but often it's conditional. You're loved if you obey. You're loved if you stay loyal. You're loved if you don't question. That's not unconditional love, it's emotional currency traded for obedience. What's even more striking is how both systems respond to outsiders. Cults label critics as dangerous, poisoned by lies. Religions do the same, branding non-believers as sinful, lost, or enemies of the faith. The boundaries are clear, insiders are saved, outsiders are threats. That's not coincidence. That's the same script running on a larger stage. So why don't we see it? Because religions have had centuries to refine their image. Cathedrals instead of living rooms. Scriptures instead of pamphlets. Holidays instead of secret gatherings. It's the same psychological engine, but with better PR. The cult in someone's backyard feels scary because it's small. The religion in a cathedral feels safe because it's common. But underneath, the mechanics haven't changed at all. And that's the unsettling truth. Repetition isn't evidence. Popularity isn't proof. Just because billions believe something doesn't make it more logical than a group of 100. It just means the system has lasted long enough for us to stop questioning it. Let's look at how this plays out in history, because the pattern repeats itself over and over. Take Christianity in its earliest days. To the Roman Empire, it was a strange, dangerous cult. Followers met in secret, rejected local traditions, practiced rituals outsiders couldn't understand, and believed in visions, prophecies, and miracles. They followed a charismatic figure who claimed to be the Son of God. Sound familiar? If that same story unfolded today, we'd probably call it a cult. But because it happened 2,000 years ago, we call it faith. And it's not just Christianity. Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, all of them began as small fringe movements. They were dismissed as absurd, mocked by the majority, and sometimes brutally persecuted. But they didn't vanish. They organized, they gained allies. They built structures, developed rules, and turned fringe practices into mainstream traditions. This is how cults become religions. Time doesn't erase the strange beginnings. It just buries them under centuries of repetition and authority. What once looked radical becomes sacred. What once felt threatening becomes tradition. And once the system reaches a certain scale, we stop questioning it. Think about the Heaven's Gate cult from the 1990s. Their leader claimed to be the Son of God. They wore matching clothes, cut ties with society, and believed salvation would arrive on a spaceship. We laugh at that today, calling it absurd. But how different is that from stories of fiery chariots, winged horses, or divine beings descending from the sky? Swap the spaceship for a cloud or a vision, and suddenly it doesn't look so different from the stories billions take seriously. The unsettling part is this: the mechanics don't change, only the packaging does. When enough time passes, what once felt insane starts to feel normal. And when something feels normal long enough, we stop asking whether it's true at all. So here's the question we rarely ask: do beliefs become more logical with age or just more familiar? And if familiarity is all it takes, maybe the difference between a cult and a religion isn't about truth at all. Maybe it's just about survival. Power is where things get really interesting, because both cults and religions are obsessed with it. Most cults collapse when their leaders reach too far too fast. But religions, they learned how to slow down, build hierarchies, and play the long game. They wrote rules that looked moral on the surface but were designed to protect authority. They silenced women. They punished doubters. They demonized outsiders. and they wrapped it all in the language of divine wisdom. Think about how absolute that language sounds. Always, never, pure, sinful, right, wrong. These words don't leave room for gray areas. They make the world feel simple, and that simplicity is comforting, but it's also controlling. Once you see the world in black and white, you stop asking deeper questions. You stop noticing contradictions. You just obey. Cults do this too, but on a smaller scale. They tell members, we already have all the answers. Religions use scripture to say the exact same thing. Everything has been revealed. Nothing more is needed. Don't search, don't doubt. Just follow. That isn't freedom. That isn't truth-seeking. That's submission rebranded as virtue. And submission, once it's dressed up as holiness, is hard to resist. People believe they're being faithful when in reality they're being controlled. The brilliance of the system is that it hides domination inside devotion. It convinces people that loyalty is love, that obedience is morality, and that silence is wisdom. Here's the real danger: these systems don't need violence to survive. They can look peaceful on the outside, full of ritual songs and sacred texts, while still causing deep psychological damage. They don't need to chain your body if they can chain your mind. They don't need to bar the door if guilt and fear keep you from leaving. When we strip away the layers of tradition, the resemblance between cults and religions is undeniable. Both rely on the same strategies. Both thrive on the same emotional levers. The only real difference is that one has been repeated for so long, it's no longer questioned. So maybe the question isn't what separates cults from religions, but rather how much power can a belief system gather before we stop calling it a cult. Let's talk about control, because that's the heartbeat of both cults and religions. Survivors of cults often describe the same journey. At first, it feels safe. They're told they're special, chosen part of something bigger. That comfort is intoxicating. But then the demands increase. Guilt becomes the leash. Slowly, the group becomes their entire world. Friends and family who question the belief, cut off. Independent thought branded as weakness. It's not weakness at all, it's design. The system was built to look safe at the start, only to tighten its grip later. Religions follow this same blueprint. They hand out answers before you even know the questions. They give you identity before you've had the chance to form your own. They tell you what's good, what's evil, who to trust and who to avoid. The earlier you're exposed, the deeper it takes root. That's why so many faiths focus on children, because belief is easier to program when there's no resistance yet. And sure enough, most people end up dying in the same religion they were born into. Not because they freely chose it, but because they were conditioned from the start. And then there's urgency. Cults thrive on end times, thinking the idea that the world is about to collapse, that time is running out, that you must act now. Religions play the same card. Judgment Day, the rapture, eternal punishment, or eternal paradise. These images push people to react emotionally instead of thinking logically. And when fear rises, critical thinking drops. Urgency is one of the most effective tools for shutting down doubt. That's why questioning is discouraged, if not outright punished. Cults call doubt betrayal. Religions call it sin. The message is the same. Don't look outside. Don't think for yourself. Don't ask the wrong questions. Truth isn't something you search for. It's already been delivered. Your only job is obedience. And here's the twist: when obedience is packaged as morality, people embrace their own chains. They defend the very system that controls them, not because they're blind, but because the system has fused itself with their sense of identity. To question it feels like questioning who they are. To leave it feels like death. That's the real genius of these systems. They don't just control what you do, they control who you believe you are. Now let's look at what happens when these systems grow beyond the small and secretive stage, because that's when the real transformation takes place. Over time, cults that survive long enough learn to polish their image. They stop looking extreme and start looking respectable. They soften their language, rewrite their rules, and present themselves as benevolent. They build schools, hospitals, and charities. They write children's books, produce documentaries, and weave themselves into the cultural fabric. What was once seen as bizarre begins to look like tradition. And once something looks traditional, people stop questioning it. That's exactly how major religions evolved. What we call faith today was once treated as radical extremism. Followers were mocked, persecuted, even executed. But repetition and survival turned them into something society could accept. With time came legitimacy, and with legitimacy came power. The beliefs themselves didn't necessarily change, they just became more familiar. And here's the catch: familiarity doesn't equal truth. A system can inspire charity and violence at the same time. It can offer love with one hand and control with the other. People often say, but look at all the good religion has done. That's like saying a cult that feeds its members can't be harmful. Good deeds don't erase harmful structures. A system that inspires both kindness and cruelty isn't automatically good, it's complicated. Even the kindness religion inspires often comes with strings attached. Love your neighbor if they believe. Forgive others if they repent. Help the poor so you can earn salvation. That's not unconditional love. That's transactional morality. It's giving with one hand while keeping the other hand firmly on the leash. And hope, that's another card both cults and religions play. Hope isn't exclusive to truth. It can be manufactured, sold, and used as bait. False hope works because it feels good even when it's not grounded in reality. And when that hope is tied to obedience, it doesn't free people, it traps them. They don't stay because they're enlightened. They stay because they're afraid to lose their sense of meaning. That's not faith, that's dependency. So maybe the question isn't whether religion is good or bad, but whether the emotional hooks it uses are actually about truth or just about control dressed up as comfort. It's not hard to see why people fall into these systems. Most aren't searching for manipulation. They're searching for connection, purpose, and answers. They want to feel less alone. They want to believe life has direction. Cults provide that. Religions provide that. And that's why both are so effective. They don't win followers by proving miracles or offering evidence. They win by speaking to deep emotional needs. And here's the striking part: when those needs are strong enough, people will believe almost anything. They'll rearrange their entire worldview to fit the promise of belonging, guidance, or salvation. Logic doesn't stand much of a chance against loneliness or fear. That's why groups that look absurd from the outside can feel so real, so irresistible from the inside. The difference between a cult and a religion isn't found in their structure, it's found in their scale. Cults are small religions that haven't spread yet. Religions are cults that succeeded. That's it. The content isn't magically different. What changes is how many people accept it. If enough people repeat a belief, it stops being weird. If enough people practice the same rituals, they stop looking suspicious and start looking sacred. The story doesn't need to change. It just needs to be told often enough. Over time, familiarity itself becomes the proof. And this is where social reinforcement comes in. We humans are wired to trust the crowd more than our own doubts. If everyone around you believes, it feels safer to believe too. And once belief becomes tied to family, community, and identity, breaking away feels nearly impossible. Leaving isn't just leaving a set of ideas, it's leaving your world behind. That's why so many people defend their faith so fiercely. Not necessarily because the ideas make sense, but because their lives, memories, and relationships are woven into it. To challenge the system feels like tearing yourself apart. To walk away feels like betrayal, not just of the faith, but of the people you love. So the difference between cult and religion isn't about truth or evidence. It's about how deeply a belief system embeds itself into society until questioning it feels unthinkable. When you look at modern religions, the cult-like roots are still visible, just hidden beneath layers of tradition. Think about the fundamentalist offshoots, the isolated communities, the groups enforcing strict dress codes, gender roles, and punishments. These aren't strange deviations. They're reminders of where the religion began. Strip away legal restrictions or public scrutiny, and many religions quickly return to their original script: control, fear, and exclusion. That's not a flaw. That's the code they were built on. Listen closely to the way leaders speak. The language is filled with absolutes: always, never, pure, sinful, chosen, damned. This kind of black and white thinking isn't unique to one group. It's a classic tool of control. It simplifies the world, making it easier to divide us from them. And when nuance disappears, critical thinking goes with it. People stop noticing contradictions. They stop asking questions. They just obey. And obedience, once it's reframed as righteousness, becomes addictive. Followers feel virtuous, even holy, for submitting. They defend their chains because they believe the chains are sacred. That's how control survives, not by force, but by convincing people that submission itself is a moral act. Now here's a thought experiment. Imagine a brand new religion starting today. A man walks into the desert, says he spoke to God, and comes back with dietary laws, dress codes, and strict punishments. Would you trust him? Probably not. Most of us would call that a cult. So why do we accept the same claims when they come from religions that are centuries old? The only difference is time. We don't give new cults the benefit of the doubt because they haven't been normalized yet. Their beliefs sound too strange, their rituals too extreme, but give them a few hundred years of repetition scriptures and traditions, and suddenly what once felt bizarre begins to feel sacred. It's not logic that makes the difference, it's familiarity. That's how belief spreads. Not because it makes sense, but because it's been told often enough. Repetition turns the unbelievable into the unquestionable. Here's the unsettling part. You don't need to be in a small cult to be controlled, and you don't need to be religious to recognize the tactics. Control wears many disguises. Sometimes it's a robe, sometimes it's a smile, sometimes it's a verse sung in harmony. What looks like love can be a leash. What looks like truth can be a trap. What feels like hope can be a drug. And once these systems are in place, people will defend them with everything they have. Not because they're blind, but because their identity is tied to the belief. Their friendships, families, memories, and traditions are built around it. To question the system feels like tearing yourself apart. To leave feels like losing your world. That's why people cling even when they're suffocating, even when the questions won't go away. Letting go feels like death, so they hold on. But real freedom isn't about comfort. It's about clarity. It's about asking the questions that make you uneasy, even when the answers unsettle everything you thought you knew. It's about walking away when the love you're given is conditional, when the truth you're told is designed to silence you, when the hope you're promised comes with chains. The line between cult and religion is far thinner than most people want to admit. In many cases, it's not even a line at all. It's a timeline. One just hasn't grown up yet. The other has grown so big that we've forgotten how strange it really is. But the tactics, the psychology, the emotional levers of fear, guilt, belonging, and obedience, they're the same. And if we don't learn to question them, we'll keep falling for them over and over again. Because repetition doesn't make something true. Popularity doesn't make something logical. And comfort doesn't make something safe. Freedom begins the moment we see control for what it really is.